We're going to talk about a tough subject here, but it needs to be discussed because it made national headlines, probably international. Before we get to it, though, it does involve sexual misconduct, sexual abuse. So plan accordingly and take care when you listen. What's interesting is we can't pretend like issues in the church related to this are new and we don't know how to handle it.
Right.
1 Corinthians 5, like I'm talking first century church, the Apostle Paul had a personal encounter with Jesus. That's how close it was, okay? He saw a sexual problem in Corinth with a member of a congregation, and he got heated at the church for not dealing with this, for not calling it out and telling them to stop, and if they don't knock it off, kick them out of the church. I mean, Paul was so clear on this. You got to read through it. That we can't pretend like, oh, we don't know what to do about this. It's a new problem. No, clearly an old problem. And I got to be honest, I'm more and more disheartened at how often this is happening in the church today.
Mm-hmm.
And how poorly we consistently handle these issues again and again and again and again.
And I'm afraid it's not that it's happening more. It's just that it's coming to light more.
Yeah.
Because the Catholic Church scandals that first started the major unveiling of this particular sin went back decades.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was going to say centuries, but I don't know if that's really accurate.
Well, I'm sure it did. It's just they don't know that they have records of that. The Southern Baptist Convention had a big expose in the Houston Chronicle years ago. And I didn't pay enough attention to this when the story first broke like a week and a half ago. It's partly because I'm just not familiar with the pastor. His name is Robert Morris. He's 62 years old, and he founded Gateway Church in the Fort Worth, Texas area in the year 2000. I've been to Fort Worth once, but I got to be honest, I'd never heard of Gateway Church or Robert Morris. Am I the only one?
I actually have heard of Robert Morris. Station I used to work at played his 2-minute program.
Yeah, and there's no good excuse because he's a well-known figure. So for those who aren't familiar, he's grown. The church, Gateway Church, has grown to become one of the biggest mega churches in the U.S. I mean, 10 campuses, tens of thousands of people worship on a Sunday. He's also has a global following thanks to his Christian TV and radio ministries. He formerly served as an advisor to President Trump. He was an advisor to Mark Driscoll's new church. The church, Gateway Church, is non-denominational and charismatic, and Gateway is one of the top producers of evangelical worship music. Singer Carrie Job served as its previous worship leader. I had no idea. And Gateway Church music is streamed over 300 million times last year alone.
Wow.
Made me feel embarrassed to not be aware of it. Hello, I'm under a rock. I'm Brian.
Yeah, but you can't know every mega church.
No. So here's the story. And I'm going to share it with you in a way that kind of is the way it's been revealed over the last couple of decades and then over about a week until just a few days ago. Gateway acknowledged that there had been accusations made against Pastor Robert Morris. And they acknowledged it in social media and to the Christian Post, saying the church had known of the allegations. Elders wrote that Pastor Morris had, quote, been open and forthright about a moral failure he had over 35 years ago when he was in his 20s prior to him starting Gateway Church. In fact, I've learned that he has made this moral failing, like he brings it up occasionally in his ministry life. So in a statement to the Christian Post, Pastor Morris wrote, when I was in my early 20s, I was involved in an inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady in a home where I was staying. And then he described some of it, said it wasn't intercourse. He said, but it was wrong. This behavior happened on several occasions over the next few years. Now, according to Morris, he confessed and repented in 1987 when he was on staff at Shady Grove Church, which later became part of Gateway. Gateway stated that Morris had been subject to a 2-year restoration process, including, quote, professional counseling and freedom ministry counseling, and that since implementing accountability measures, there have been, quote, no other moral failures in his life. Seems like we're doing okay.
No
Yeah.
other moral failures, though, is a very large statement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, because the gospel, I mean, I know what they meant, but generally speaking, that's bad theology because
Right.
all of us sin in thought, word, and deed daily. That's why we need Jesus.
Yeah. He just didn't commit this particular sin again that we know of.
Yeah, and here's where it's just where it gets insane. Okay. For years, he's been talking about in his early 20s this inappropriate relationship with a young lady that spanned years. She was 12.
Yeah. So it's not an inappropriate relationship. It's a criminal activity, and he should have marched himself to the police station, let alone everybody else in his restoration process.
Yeah, he was in his early 20s staying at her home, her family's home. She was 12, and this continued until she was 16.
And he was married and had children at that point.
So we're talking, I mean, pedophilia
Yeah.
and adultery.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't it? I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? Young lady? And he, with a clear conscience, was making this story part of his testimony. I had an inappropriate relationship with a young lady. Excuse me, you were in your 20s and she was a child.
Yes.
So you might be wondering, how could this possibly be that this happened and elders weren't aware of it? Well, in a statement this last Tuesday announcing his resignation, because of course, once the victim went public on a website that exposes these kind of situations, he was forced to resign ultimately. The Board of Elders said this, that they were heartbroken and appalled to learn that what they believed was an extramarital relationship was allegedly abuse of a child. They said, regretfully, prior to Friday, June 14th, the elders did not have all the facts of the inappropriate relationship between Morris and the victim, including her age at the time and the length of the abuse. The elders' prior understanding was that Morris's extramarital relationship, which he had discussed many times through his ministry, was with a, quote, young lady and not abuse of a 12-year-old child. They're saying they didn't know. Meanwhile, NBC is reporting, along with many others, that actually maybe they did know.
Oh, no.
On September 20th, 2005, the victim initiated an email exchange with Pastor Morris, and at least one elder was aware of this exchange, as was, by the way, his attorney, because here's how it went. She wrote, in part, 23 years after you began destroying my life, I am still dealing with the pain and damage you caused. She was 35 at the time when she wrote this. I want some type of restitution. Pray about it and call me. Because, she said, men, quote, men that have over 100 counts of child molestation go to prison. She said, men who pastor churches that have over 100 counts of child molestation go to prison and pay punitive damages. You have not had to do either. And so he responded to her 2 weeks later, my wife and I really do care for you, and we sincerely want God's best for you. And he believed that he had, quote, obtained your forgiveness as well as your family's. And then he issued a legal warning to her. He said, my attorney advises that if I pay you money under a threat of exposure, you could be criminally prosecuted. And Debbie and I do not want to do that. If you need more information, have your attorney contact mine. And they exchanged a bunch more emails where she's like, listen, I'm hurting. And in a statement to NBC News, there was an elder by the name of Tom Lane who was aware of the situation in 2005, that these exchanges were going on and that she was threatening to expose the situation. But again, the elders are saying, well, we didn't know she was 12.
One of you did.
And he's saying he didn't know.
Did he read the emails that he was aware of?
We don't know. We don't know.
Does he understand English?
What an epic disaster. That is a scar on the church. One of the biggest churches in the United States of America, the lead pastor sexually abused a child and used it as his testimony.
Yeah.
We'll continue chatting about this a little bit because we've got to process it together. I'm anxious to hear what the other parts of our team, other ladies, feel about this, and what we can learn from it as a church, and how we even address this when people bring it up to us, because they will. Someone brought it up to me on Saturday, and I was like, wait, what happened? And I was embarrassed. I didn't know. I'm sure much of the country is shaking their heads at the church in America after one of the largest churches in America had a pastor resign in shame as he used part of his testimony how he had an inappropriate relationship with a young lady, he called it, when he was in his early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And she had the courage and the strength to finally go public with this, that between ages of 12 and 16, he abused her.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the first incident was on December 25th, 1982. That's right, Christmas. And again, there's a despicable nature of using it as your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And making it sound like it was something that it actually wasn't, where he literally abused a child.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It wasn't an extramarital affair where some scamp came onto you and you were just weak in the moment. I'm sure he wrote it off like that.
Well, yeah, and elders knew this was a thing. They didn't ask questions. Like, no one ever said to him, what do you mean a young lady? You were in your early 20s.
Yeah. You wouldn't think he was sugarcoating like that.
Doesn't get much younger than that unless we're talking about a minor.
Well, right, and that's just it. It's like just logic and common sense. You're in a private meeting as elders. He's got the young lady narrative.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was in his early 20s. Let's get specific for just a minute here. No one asked him to do that?
No, apparently not.
We've got an issue here. Now, I know it's not your church, not your pastor, but this reflects on the church.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, you haven't said much. What's your reaction to this? I can tell you're disgusted and overwhelmed.
Yeah. I think, like you said, I'm kind of shocked that no one asked him any further questions. They just said, oh, what you're saying is fine. That's enough. He made it sound like it was an affair.
Mm-hmm.
With someone else that, would be consenting to this relationship that was of age. That's what he made it sound like.
Yeah, he did. And he must have known all these years. I mean, he knew she was 12.
Yeah.
There's no way that's consensual.
No.
It's not even legally consensual.
No. And for him to he was specific about the language he used, which is despicable. He knew what he was doing. He knew that saying a young lady shouldn't, but it could make people not ask any more questions. So I go, okay. Saying an inappropriate relationship, misconduct, whatever. He knew what he was doing by using those words in that language so that he didn't have to say what was true. And then the fact that he's using that as a part of his testimony of like something he overcame is obscene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because what he did was criminal.
Yes.
Exactly.
And then he threatened her with legal action and framed it as, we're concerned about you. We don't want you to have to go through us suing you. So please be quiet.
And all these years of ministry, 24 years, started the church in 2000. He didn't ever preach on 1 Corinthians 5? I find that hard to believe.
Right.
Paul was mad because there was a guy who was basically in a relationship with his stepmother in Corinth. This thing in Texas sounds worse to me.
Mm-hmm.
As twisted as that is. I mean.
Yeah, we like to talk about how crazy it was in Corinth.
Yeah,
how
is
people
horrid.
were, so disgusting and nasty in Corinth. This is horrific.
It's objectively worse because at least the stepmother was of consenting age.
And so if you're a non-Christian or someone who's maybe considering Christianity and you hear this and you're horrified, we are too. It's despicable. It's wicked. What he's been doing is abusive. It would have disqualified him from being a pastor all these years ago. He should be in jail.
Yes, exactly.
And the fact that the church didn't know about it is equally inexcusable. Because he was open about this enough that someone must ask the question.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Even if it was a person who was of consenting age and it was someone who agreed to this, they should know who it is, how old they were, what was happening. They should have all the details. His elder board. They should be asking questions, not just okay with whatever story he gives them.
Mhm.
They need to find out what the entirety of the truth is.
Yeah, you forfeit the right to keep any of this secret
Yeah.
when you're a pastor.
Yeah.
They should have pressed him.
Yeah, and the next layer of tragedy, of course, is that in many places, the statute of limitations prevents criminal cases from going forward when victims disclose decades-old abuse.
Mm-hmm.
There are some states that are trying to change this. But this is where, I mean, why wouldn't the church begin, like Christian people begin advocating for no statute of limitations for sexual abuse of a child,
Mhm.
particularly for clergy?
And for what it's worth, as I understand it, she has brought these claims out numerous times, and it just never got traction until this particular report source says, "Hey, let me latch onto that and brought it to light." But
Yeah,
other times she's mentioned it, and nobody really cared.
yeah, and she gives credit to, there's a retired pastor in her life that, as she had the courage to share this pain with this person, this pastor encouraged her to expose this.
Good for him.
And the care of a Christian journalist allowed her to have the courage as well, because it takes a lot of courage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed she seems to still be a Christian after all this. That is God's grace that he's brought her through this, and she's not completely turned her back on the entire religion.
Yeah, and there was a great quote. Here's what she said. To the congregation of Gateway Church and the countless who have followed Robert Morris online, my heart is equally broken for you. Please remember our faith is in Jesus, not an institution or a man in the pulpit. Keep your faith.
Good for her.
Whoa. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how many of these are we going to see?
Mm-hmm.
I think the important thing to remember, as disturbing as it is to think about, is this is an extreme example. This is one of the worst things we can think of that happened to happen at one of the largest churches in the country. How many similar issues are happening at much smaller churches, and the victims are never going to get justice because they don't have the ability to, take down a massive public figure like this.
It's not a named pastor we all know.
Right.
And for those who don't know, even, you might be like, oh, why are you talking about this in public? Well, Jesus and all the scriptures are so clear about our responsibility to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, to be a voice for the innocent. Greater religion is no man than this than he who cares for orphans and widows in their distress. Like, think orphans and widows, the most vulnerable people in that society. Time and again, we're called to care for the poor over and over and over. There's this ethic among Christians to be aware of and care for and defend the defenseless.
I find it very difficult when a case first breaks, because women, quote unquote, like the stereotype, the big push is believe the victim. And I get that, but also people are innocent until proven guilty. So if I just went on the alleged victim's charges and, booted a guy out or whatever, and then find out, oh, she was making it up, which happens from time to time.
Very rare, but yeah.
So then it's like, okay, it's hard to hold that in balance. Yes, I believe what you said could have happened, and I believe it's possible that you didn't do this. To try to hold both parties innocent and guilty at the same time until further facts come out or I become aware of further facts. It's a struggle I have.
Yeah, statistically, when you look at these things, false accusations are very rare. Very rare, as I've heard Ed Stetzer talk about. But I think caution is certainly required when these things come out.
Mm-hmm.
But the extra despicable nature of this, to me, is that not only did it happen and he hid it, he twisted it and used it as a testimony.
Yeah.
That's an extra level of just despicable.
Yeah, it's like so gross to talk about it, like speak about it regularly in his ministry. I'm just like you. I had inappropriate sexual conduct. No, 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 no.
You're a criminal.
You are a criminal pedophile.
And the original church put him out of ministry to work on humility. I think that's what they said. He committed a sin of pride, and so he needed to work on humility. So for a month, he was a night clerk at a Motel 6.
Yeah. And again, people are going to ask Christians about this because it's national news. And I think we should, with gusto and righteous indignation, condemn the wickedness.
Mm-hmm.
We don't win any friends or help the church in any way by being defensive in any way. Like, we should be the loudest people saying, this is horrific.
This hurts God's heart.
And if you're an elder in a church or some sort of leader, however your church is built, make sure you're asking the questions. Go deeper in these confessions that come up when you're researching a new pastor or a new staff member, and have the guts, if it is a crime that they have committed and they've not been held accountable, hold them accountable. You know, if there's something like this that happens, the church leaders should have been, yes, we'll work on restoring you when we come visit you in prison. Here we go. Let's go to the police office right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Even though the statute of limitations is gone, march him to the police station.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, but I would say as a prayer point, pray for this victim. She's suffered for her entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And pray for the church. I'm with her in her courage and her strength to pray for the church, because it's one of the biggest churches in the country, and a lot of people unwittingly follow a pastor more than they follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Pray that people's faith would be sustained in the midst of this wickedness, and that those who listen to his show or do whatever else will turn to Christ and not be pressed away from following Jesus because of his wickedness. Oh, Lord Jesus, come.